Hi, everyone. We're saying hi to Donald Scott, a solution engineer at Port. He will be delivering Getting Started with Port today. Getting Started is a webinar that shows you how to get started with Port. Don will go through a demo, but feel free to ask any questions you'd like in the Q&A section. We'll answer them probably live. So feel free to ask anything. And then we will also be sending a recording of the session in case you want to reference that later on. And we are recording this in case anyone has any objection to that. And that's it. So Donald, go ahead. And let's get started with Port.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's good to speak with you all this morning and to meet with you all this morning. As Ronnie said, as Ronnie said, I'm Donald Scott. I'm a solutions engineer with Port. I'm going to be giving a brief introduction to how we think of IDP in general, and then some of the specific capabilities that Port offers, and then we'll give a brief demo of the same. Feel free to ask questions at any time. You don't have to wait until the end. Ronnie will stop me to answer your questions. This is for you, so we want you to get the most value out of this session. With that said, I will go ahead and get started. Okay, so what is an IDP? What is an IDP to Port? So the way I like to think of the internal development portal is this should be a transformational technology in your development organization. This should be the place where anyone who has a question about the development organization, question about an API, question about cost, question about anything that has to do with the developer organization, they should be able to come to your developer portal and begin. That should be the starting place where they begin to get the answers to those questions. Secondarily, any operations that need to be taken within the development organization by users of your portal. Think of developers, for example, needing to deploy code, needing to scaffold new repositories. Think of finance folks who need to come in and inspect cost of services. Think of VPs of engineering who need to understand the health and maturity of their services and of their operations over time. Any persona should be able to come into the portal and to get the answers that they need and to do the work that they need to do without having to understand the complexities of underlying tool chains and things like this to do things like deploy code, etc. So that's the way that we think of portal, and we try to deliver exactly that experience to our customers. We operate on the principle that we should be able to ingest any data that's relevant. So if you look on the far right on the screen, data from all the tools that are commonly used, and even those that are not common. We have mechanisms. If you have internal data sources that you want to send data into your portal from for certain purposes, that's possible with Port. So we have a very flexible approach to data ingestion, including integrations and other means. And then for all the personas that you want to expose that data to, we have the capability to design user-specific views around all those data. The main pillars of Port here are these four things. So first of all, the software catalog, being able to catalog things of import throughout your development organization. The most common thing that people want to catalog is their services, right? You want a list of all the services that exist in the organization so that those who need to understand the details of services, either engineers building services, their own services, needing to use APIs from other services, they should be able to come to the catalog and understand the details about those services. You'll see when we talk about the way that the way that Port does catalog, that our catalog and capability is very flexible. You can represent many types of data, not just services, and we'll understand why that's important through the demo. The second piece here is scorecarding, being able to understand the health and maturity of your catalog entries over time, services and other things, wanting to understand whatever you want to measure or need to measure. You want to understand your basic door metrics. How frequently is my service being deployed? You want to understand it on a per service basis. You want to understand it in aggregate if you're a manager across all your services. But the ability to understand health and metrics and to report on those over time about your catalog entries. Self-service is a big area for us. This is what enables users. Let's take another example of deploying code, having to not understand all the underlying CI/CD tool chains, observability tool chains, security tool chains that are involved when scaffolding a new service properly according to your golden path. Instead of having to understand all those details, you want ideally have a developer or the user come to the portal and simply click a button and have that work done for them. That's what self-service means to us, and that's the experience that we try to deliver, with the product to our customers. And then workflow automation, wanting to respond to interesting events, let's say the degradation of a service according to one of your scorecards, you want to be able to automatically respond to events of that type. We call that workflow automation. We'll focus primarily on cataloging and self-service today. We'll touch a little on scorecards. And then tying it all together is RBAC, the ability to restrict or create certain views that are specific for certain users, revealing only the data that they should have access to, and allowing them to exercise the tasks only that they are allowed to. So with that said, unless there are any questions on anything we've said so far, we'll hop into a demo and we'll see how this all kind of ties together. All right. So let's go through a couple of user scenarios and kind of make concrete some of the things that we just talked about in slides. The first thing I'll do is show you how we would execute a self-service task, right? And the most common, like I said, the most common thing people want to catalog are their services, right? So I have a catalog of all of my services here. And by the way, the site I'm demoing out of right now is a public demo site, demo.getport.io. You guys can go after the webinar and play with it yourself. I'll also, if we have time, do a little bit of live demo from my own port account to make things a bit more concrete as well. But so the first thing that and most common thing people want to catalog is all their services. I want a list of all my services. Currently, people need to do that, and they're doing it through not so great means, right? Spreadsheets, trying to maintain lists of services and spreadsheets, Confluence stocks and things like that. Almost immediately, they become stale, they get lost, and you resort to Q&A, Slack, essentially. So you want to have a common place where people can go and understand all the details that there are to understand for a service. Okay. So let's talk about self-service first. What do I do if I'm an engineer? I'm new to the organization, or I'm an experienced engineer in the organization. I haven't built a new service in a while because I haven't had to. What do I do to scaffold a new service in such a way that is compliant with the requirements of the leadership of my organization, and such that it connects to all the tool chains that I need to be able to operate that service properly? Again, CI/CD, observability, security, etc., whatever it means for your organization, right? Typically, I would have to figure out all those pieces myself, file tickets, go through Slack or Teams to find out who are the right people who can help me, all these things. And it takes away my time from what I really want to be doing is showing value to the organization by writing new feature code, right? So I'd love to just come into a portal like this and have a button like this where I can say, hey, just scaffold a new service, right? There is an experience where all I have to do is fill out a form that's presented to me, okay? And then I get my new service. So let's just do that. So in this case, I can say, hey, new service, 1000. I can choose the team that is going to own and operate that service, my team, Team Batman. I will choose the domain that the service is going to operate in. It's going to be an analytics service, et cetera, et cetera. So I just fill out the form fields. I'll choose a language that the service is going to be developed in. It's going to be a Go service. But so my experience now, instead of having to understand all those various tool chains to get this basic bit of work done to get me going, all I have to do now is push this button and that work will happen for me. This is what we think of when we think of self-service. So I can go here and I can visualize what's happening. I get a little progress, a little bit of update. So I can go and get coffee. I don't have to think about anything or beat my head or talk to anybody, and I just get my new service. So I got my success message now and see my new service is scaffolded. So I should be able to go back to that same service catalog and see an entry for my service, because in Port World, we tie our catalog capability very closely with our self-service capability. Again, with the goal of allowing engineering teams to spend the majority of their time writing new feature code and not understanding tool chains and searching for data. So I can use the link right here to go to look at the catalog entry for my new service 1000 that I just scaffolded. And I can see a host of things have been done for me automatically while I was getting coffee. Okay. So as that repository is being scaffolded, I can see that, the port self-service action had already assigned someone to be on call, for the service. I can see that my service is already set up to be scanned by my security tooling, Sneak in this case. I can see there's a dedicated Slack channel for my service. I can see that I have links out to my observability tooling for that service, and of course the GitHub repo where my service lives, right? So all this happened for me at the push of a button, and I can immediately go and start writing feature code, for this service by checking out that repo. And staying on the concept of self-service, now that I have this catalog entry existing, there's a host of other things I might want to do to this existing service now that it exists, from a self-service point of view. And I can access all of my existing self-service actions from the three-button menu here. If I go here, I can see there's a host of things that I can do to this service. Remember, I haven't written any code for this service. All I did was push the button to have it scaffolded for me, by the port self-service action. But I can see that I can go ahead and add a secret to this service. I can see I can change who's on call and page duty for this service. I can see that I can go ahead and deploy this service. It's already connected to my CI/CD tooling, and I haven't even written a line of code for it, right? This is the power of self-service. Now your engineers, other users of your portal, they can focus on the work that's most critical to the organization, and not on ancillary work in terms of trying to understand tool chains that are not directly related to their job, which we've learned from our customers can take upwards of 50% of developers' times, and in some cases, right? So that's self-service, okay? So now let's talk about some of the cataloging capabilities of the port portal, right? So I'm currently looking, and Rona, keep me honest if there's any questions if I'm missing any.
No, there are no questions, but if any of you have questions about the software catalog and what Donald has been showing, this is the time.
Excellent. So we'll move on to talking about some of the more advanced cataloging capabilities of the port portal, of the port IDP. So I'm looking at my current service now, which is a service I just scaffolded, my new service 1000. I can go back to my entire service catalog and see all of my services, because now that I have my service existing, in the course of developing my service, there are other services that I'm going to need to talk to. We are a microservices shop. My service doesn't live on an island by itself. So let's say I need to understand something about, the pricing service. So I can just come into the catalog, type pricing. Um, okay. So I've got a catalog entry for this service, just like I have for the service that I just scaffolded. So I can click into it. And I can see that the presentation for this catalog page of a different service is exactly the same as my service with different information. So now for every service, I have a consistent view of that service. And as the portal owner and as the portal designer, you get to decide exactly what that view is for all of your users, right? And so if you don't use PagerDuty, maybe you have a link to who's on call in Opsgenie, or maybe you don't use Sneak, you use some other tool. You get to design, and we'll talk about how we design our data models, but you get to design for every catalog object exactly what information gets presented for that object. This goes to the flexibility of the port portal. In addition, what you'll notice below is that below the kind of the high level catalog information that I have, and it's extensive, right? I can put whatever I want here. I've got README files. I can see some, API documentation. I've got my Swagger APIs here. I can even test them from here. I've got, architecture diagrams, et cetera, et cetera. You can literally present whatever information that is of import to your developers as they inspect their services. You can design the portal experience that is most meaningful, most impactful for them. Okay. In addition, we have scorecards, which we haven't talked about yet. We'll return to the concept of scorecards, but this is how you would track the health and maturity of your catalog objects over time. But back to the main catalog page, right? So below the high-level information about this object, I have a section called related entities. And this is the capability that Port does really well, if not uniquely, right? So below my service, I have a bunch of so-called related entities. And what these are catalog objects of different types that are related to the catalog entry in question, to the pricing service. So if you look over at the catalog browser on the far left here, you can see that in addition to services, which is the primary thing people are interested in cataloging, I have a bunch of other things that are related to services and that are interesting, some of them in and of themselves, right? So I have things like, I can see things like, pull requests, that are coming up against my GitHub repos for my services. I can see I have data about feature flags. I have data about my Kubernetes clusters, data about alerts, etc. So you can literally, as we said in the slides, you can pull in whatever data you like that is useful to your development teams as they go about doing the work that they do on a daily basis for developing and operating their services, right? And so the way this manifests very usefully is in relationships. So if I come back to my pricing service here, I can see that below the pricing service, I have related to it live running instances of that service. So instead of just reasoning about the service itself, I can see data about the running instances of that service. I can see data about the deployment history of that service. Who is deploying the service? Where are they deploying it? What is the success rate of their deployments? I can see services that are related from an architectural point of view to my service. I can see open PRs against that service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I can navigate these relationships to make information discovery really, really easy. No more jumping through, Slack channels, no more, jumping through Confluence pages, no more jumping through, different pages in your IDP solution. You can navigate these very logical links that we built out in the port IDP. So I can go from the pricing catalog entry to a catalog entry representing a running instance of that service. I can go to pricing, running, and production here. And when I see the page for it, I will see that I'm presented with different data, right? Every data model import can have different properties that are useful when viewing that data model. So for the running service, I'm not so interested in its GitHub repo, but I may want to know its resource metrics, right? CPU utilization, how many replicas are in it. This is a Kubernetes service probably, so how many replicas it's running, what is this, the memory it's consuming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what you'll notice below is that this entity, this pricing, production, running instance is an instance of a running service, not a service anymore. It has yet other catalog entries that it is related to. So for a running service, I may be interested in what are the cloud resources that it is consuming, right? So again, the point is you can make these very, very logical links and connections to related data in your organization, because it's not just all about the service. There's many other aspects of the service, many other things that are related to the services that developers and other users need when they're inspecting, solving problems, developing, trying to answer questions about these things. Okay, excellent. So let's talk a little bit about how this all manifests. How do we put together these relationships, in Port? So when it comes to data ingestion and port, it's a three-stage process, right? So the very first process is designing your data models, right? So what do I actually want to represent in my catalog? And we do that in what we call our builder area. So we have these things called blueprints, and every blueprint is just a data model of some catalog object that I want to represent, like a service, like a pull request, etc. If I open up the service blueprint, I will see all the fields that I, as the portal designer, get to decide are going to be present in this data model of a service. And I can see that I have data coming from many different places: PagerDuty, GitHub. I have my Swagger API, Sneak vulnerabilities, etc. And you can add as many new properties as you want. This boils down to it's a JSON object, and which means that you can track it and store it over code. In code, you can store this in your repository, you can version it over time, etc. You can do so in a GitOps fashion. I can edit this in the JSON if I choose to, but it boils down to a JSON object. So you can see that the data is coming from many different places, which means there's a very flexible data modeling process here. So the first step is building your data models, your blueprints. What do I want to represent? The second piece is choosing where you want the data to fill it up to come from, right? What are your data sources? What are the places where you want to get that data? Like I said, PagerDuty, GitHub, etc. Any data source you can think of, we can pull data from. And so then the third part is mapping between your data source and your blueprint. We probably won't get into that level of depth today, but that is the process of getting data into port, and you can get data from any place. So another really powerful thing here is relationships, right? So remember, we have many different types of blueprints, okay, and they can be related to each other to deliver the logical traversal experience that I showed you on the previous screens. So in the builder, the relationships are represented by the lines coming into and out of the various blueprints. So in the demo, we saw a relationship between a service, a pricing service, and running instances of that service. So if I traverse this line, I will go up to the running instance blueprint. And you can see that the running instance blueprint is a different blueprint in and of itself. It's a first-class citizen import. It has its own data fields. It has its own data model and its own data sources, right? And blueprints can share data sources. So by these means, you can see how that you can build out the data flows and experiences that are exactly unique to your organization, that are meaningful to your developers or to your users, whoever they be, right? So in this way, you can get the highest value out of your portal in terms of search and discovery of information, and in the development of and the execution of tasks that are overly cumbersome to most of your developers today from a cognitive overload point of view, having to learn so many systems just to do basic things. You can give them push button experiences to where they can get high value work done very quickly at the push of a button. Okay, awesome. So the last piece I'll mention in this demo is scorecards. So let's go back to the catalog. All right. And we'll take a look at a few scorecard examples. So let's go back to that same pricing service. And we'll see that the catalog, I'm sorry, the service has a bunch of scorecards that have been built out. Now, remember, we just saw how that we can use the builder to build our blueprints and to ingest data into the portal. And then that data can be the basis for scorecards. And scorecards allow you to use various metrics that you care about to measure the health and maturity of your catalog entries over time. And this is for every catalog entry, not just services. Every catalog entry can have its own set of scorecards. So here are just a few examples. We're looking at some basic door metrics for our services. What is our unit test coverage? We're looking at deployment frequency, etc. So you name it. Think of any metric that you'd like to measure. As long as we can bring that data in, we can build a scorecard with it. And on top of scorecards, you can build dashboards that give you trending data over time. You can use our dashboards on top of scorecards to track initiatives over time. You want to make sure all your services are meeting your standards, right? So you can build out dashboards to track things like what is your deployment frequency in aggregate. This is useful for higher level views for engineering and others in the organization. But so you can leverage whatever data you ingest to build scorecards and then dashboards on top of scorecards to track initiatives over time. So you can deliver really, really powerful use cases and flexible experiences through the portal. Okay. Now, the last thing I'll do before we do Q&A and wrap up is I'll just show a live demo of some of these things. This is a demo environment that is public, so there's limits into what action can be taken on it. So we'll go to my personal portal and just give you a live demo of some of the concepts that we've talked about. So in my personal portal here, I have just a few blueprints built out, far fewer than exist in the public demo, right? And this actually speaks to some of our integrations. We have many integrations that do a lot of this work for you. For example, if you were to install our GitHub app, it would automatically go through all of your GitHub repos and build out service entities out of all the data there, right? Out of all the repositories there. The integration also creates these blueprints by default, the service blueprint and the pull request blueprint, and it builds a relationship between the two as well. So the integrations actually do a lot of the work of data ingestion and modeling for you. And you can always change any assumptions that the integrations make by coming in and changing the blueprints and the mappings. So in this case, I have a service blueprint and a pull request blueprint. I want to show a very quick demo of how self-service acts in practice. We'll use that scaffolding use case. So if I go to my service catalog, just like we did in the public demo, I can go to my services catalog page and I can say, hey, I want to build a new service. Okay. And so I can click this button, scaffold a new service. And I will call this, new service, 100. And what will happen is the way self-service works is you connect to a backend of some sort. We won't have time to go in this call to go through those details, but feel free I'll have my email at the end. You can email me. We can have more discussions of this sort. But in the back, I can go to my personal GitHub, and I can see that the self-service action, after it runs, let me give it time to finish. Let me go to my builder and see if it's finishing. We can look at the audit log, and I can see the action that's currently running in place right now. It's still in progress. But as it runs, what it's actually doing is it's reaching out to my GitHub, and it's actually creating a new repository within my GitHub. And it just said that, we're finished. We have a new GitHub repo. So I should be able to go to my GitHub and see that service that's come, do a refresh. So yes, I have a new service that was created automatically for me. All I had to do was push the button import. It already put a little Hello World app in my service, a main.go. So this app is ready, connected to my CI/CD tool set. It can be deployed, even though I've not written any code for it just yet. This is the power of self-service, and any task that can be automated the complexity of it can be obscured behind a self-service button and port. This is the power of IDP with port. So I will go to my catalog as well. And because this self-service capability and the cataloging capabilities are connected, I should see a new entry in my catalog as well for that service. And I do, new service 100. So I can go into it and I can see, obviously, like I said, my blueprint here is a lot less built out than the one in the public demo, but the story is the same here. automatically the catalog entry has been created for me. There have been some scorecards created by the integrations. I'm not passing. Some of them right now I don't have a README in my repo, so I'm not passing some of my scorecards. So in an instance, you saw me create a new service, scaffold a new service, and I get a catalog entry for that service. And at a glance, I can see if I'm doing well or not immediately. And I can check out that repo and I can start writing code right away. And I don't have to think about what the backing technologies are behind setting all that stuff up as a user of the portal, as a developer. Thank you so much, everyone. This is what I wanted to show you for today. And if there are any questions in the audience, feel free to ask them now. I will also put up my email address in case anyone wants to reach out after. I'm also in the Port community Slack. There are many ways you can reach me, and would love to chat more about Port and how we can help you get your organization on a path like this. Thank you so much for your time today, everyone.
So thank you, Donald. We'll stay live for a minute or two. I see the first question coming in. Are there other templates rather than cookie cutter? I think it's a question that really relates to connecting self-service actions. And there's another question: does Port integrate with MKDocs?
Okay, so we'll start with the first one as far as templates other than cookie cutter. The answer to that in general is yes, and I'll just talk a little bit in more detail since the question came up about how self-service actually works. So if I go to in my personal portal here, and I go to the self-service area, I see this action scaffold of service, which is the one that ran. The way it works is you connect it essentially to a backend of some type, which does the work. The backend of choice in my case is a GitHub workflow. So I have the details for that workflow, and I will take you through the workflow file in my personal GitHub. So the workflow file lives in this repo called port actions. And the question is about, I believe the question is about, so we have a template in our guide. We have many templates in our docs on how to do the most common self-service actions. And the one for scaffolding your service uses our cookie cutter GitHub action. So if I go into my workflow file, I will see it here. This is what actually runs when I click the button to do execute. And to the question, we're using cookie cutter, our cookie cutter GitHub action to scaffold this repo. So the question is, can you use templates other than cookie cutter? The answer is yes. You can do whatever you want in the context of a GitHub workflow to do the work of scaffolding, whatever that means for your organization. By way of example, we're using this cookie cutter template or the cookie cutter GitHub action, but you can do whatever you want in here. You can write shell script in here. You can use other GitHub actions. The work of scaffolding, only your organization knows what that means for you, which is why we give you the flexibility to do exactly what you want. So yes, you can do whatever you want in the context of a backend for a self-service action. And feel free to ask a follow-up if that didn't answer directly on point. To the second question.
To
Go
the
ahead.
second question, I also think there's some examples of how to do self-service actions in the docs,
Yes,
and we'll send them later.
yes,
Second
yes,
question:
including
does Port integrate with MKDocs?
yes. And so let me point you, because that's a great point, Ronnie. So in the docs, in the self-service section, this is our doc site, docs.getport.io. And the self-service section creates self-service actions. We can create backends here. And we have many different examples for many types of backend, for the most common types of backend technologies like pipelines in GitHub or GitLab. If I go to GitHub, for example, I have many, many examples of GitHub self-service actions that you can start from or use directly, right? And so one of them is the scaffolding one that I used in my own example and that we use in the public demo, but there are many examples here, creating secrets, pull requests, locking services, unlocking services, et cetera, et cetera. So many, many different examples in here that can get you started on creating really, really powerful self-service actions. So the question on MK Docs. So today we have the ability to inject arbitrary markdown pages into your catalog entries. And about a month, maybe two, we will support the ability to bring an entire document trees, right? So to answer the question directly, today, no. Very shortly, yes. We will support the visualization of entire document trees inside your portal. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. And in fact, our roadmap is entirely public. You can see our roadmap at roadmap.getport.io. You can influence it by creating new entries, new features, and you can upvote on features that you would like to see as well. We are very, very customer driven. Much of our roadmap, by and large, is driven by customer demand. And MK Docs has been a common feature recently. So in recent months, so we're implementing it very, very shortly.
Another
question.
integration question, Flux. Does port
Yes, we do
integrate?
support Flux. Assuming you're meaning Flux CD, we do have an integration for Flux and a couple of example guides as well. Yeah. So yes, we have really strong support for Flux, also Argo, a couple other Kubernetes, a couple other CD technologies as well. Yeah. Great question. Yeah. And like I said, if there's ever an integration or a data source that you want to get data from that we don't have an integration for today, of course, you can request it on our roadmap, but also you're not limited to our integrations. We have an integration framework called Ocean, where you can develop your own first-class port integrations using our framework, which has abstractions to do some of the commonly needed to be done things in the context of port. You can also use our REST API or simple things like webhooks. If you want to get, a data source from, let's say, Flux that we don't pull in today, you just create a little webhook, influx and outgoing webhook, creating incoming webhook and port, and we will be able to ingest that data very, very easily. So you're not limited to our integrations, but in the case of Flux, we do have an integration. Great question.
I think we're done, but let's hold for one more question to see, or one more minute to see if we have another question. If not, we'll finish the webinar, and we'll send you guys the recording. Feel free to ask us questions, join the port community on Slack,
Yep.
or communicate it with us in any other way. Since I don't see any additional questions, we will finish the webinar. So thank you, everyone.
And actually, Roni, in
Yeah.
fact, since it came up, I can show a quick example of a webhook just for the recording and for any folks on who
Okay.
want to see. Yeah, so because this is a pretty powerful capability, you're not limited to our integrations for getting data in. So I'll go back to my personal portal here, or here rather. So I'll go back to my builder. There's a few other blueprints here. So we have connected to my service blueprint. I have PagerDuty service blueprint and a PagerDuty incident blueprint. So I'm going to get data from PagerDuty. We actually do have a PagerDuty integration, but our documentation on PagerDuty shows you how to get data from a webhook as well. To give an example of how to use webhooks, and there are many other examples as well. I actually won't go through the example. But I'll show you how it's configured in Port. It's very simple. So all you have to do is come into Port, go to your data sources. We'll create a new data source that's not one of our integrations, but it's a webhook. So we go to webhook. And all we need to do is, create a new one. To create a new one is kind of fill in the fields here. And Port will give you an ingest URL that you can use to ingest data from any data source. All right. So I've already done that for PagerDuty. So I've got a PagerDuty webhook down here. So all it is Port gives me this ingest URL that I can provide to PagerDuty to send payloads for events I'm interested in. So if I go to my PagerDuty, actually in a moment, so what will happen is once you do this, you create the webhook. You're actually able to come in and pull in. You're actually able to come in and pull in sample events from the tool in question, in this case, PagerDuty. And then below this, I get a sample API response. Below this, you do the mapping between the PagerDuty response and payload and the blueprint that we've created. And we created two blueprints for service and PagerDuty and an incident. So all I'm doing in here is I'm using, don't worry too much about the syntax, but we use the JQ JSON processor to essentially filter to do basic ETL on the API responses. So in this case, I'm looking at .body event data summary from the PagerDuty service response, and I'm mapping that to the identifier field in my microservice blueprint that we saw in the builder. So it's very simple, right? This is all I have to do. On the vendor side, this case PagerDuty, I just create the outgoing webhook. It will send me the events, Port will map them, and easy peasy, we're done. So I'll just give a quick demo. I won't show the webhook since we're out of time here, but I will create a new incident on a service in PagerDuty. So I'll go have one PagerDuty service called service directory. I have one service called Awesome Service in PagerDuty. It has a couple incidents on it already. I will create a new incident. We'll say incident 5. Incident 5. Stuff still loading up. Okay, we'll create the incident. Okay, so I have a new incident on that service in PagerDuty. And so I should be able to go to Port now and see that that event was processed in our portal here. And if I go to my catalog for PagerDuty incidents, I should see a new incident. So I can see incident 5, it has its own catalog page according to the blueprint, stuff is still blowing up. And I have all my relationships, just like if you were to use an integration or do any other means, I can see that this incident is related to the awesome service in PagerDuty. And the awesome service is related to the awesome service port service or awesome service in from my GitHub. So all the relationships are still built out in the same way. All we did is ingest data in a slightly different way. But by this means, you can ingest data from anywhere, right? So you're not limited to our integrations. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming today.
Minute. Oh, any last minute question, or should we close the session? So Donald, looks like we're done. It was a great session, and everyone will send you the recording. Thank you for joining.
Excellent. Bye, everyone. Look forward to hearing from you all.
Bye-bye.